Counting down 3 minutes.
Who's going to be rating us? Do you know what panel's coming in?
I believe it's going to be the chillin' chat that's going to raid in.
Oh, okay.
Hello and welcome. We'll be getting ready to go pretty soon now, 45 seconds, and then we'll kind of start getting started.
You're not picking up a bunch of crazy sounds from me, right? I see the thing my box is flashing. Anyway.
Nope, I think we're good. And it is time to get started. We just got rated with 17 viewers, continuing the CONduit! Woo! Love it. Lighting up the Twitch servers with our collective fiery passions.
I'm gonna laugh at that as well.
All right, I'll go ahead and fade out the music. Welcome to our panel on transitioning from pantsing to plotting. I'm your host, Stephanie Gildart, Steph Weaves Tales.
And I am Chloe Alex Balkan. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Good to have everybody who came in with the raid, and everybody who came in by choice too, of course.
Thank you, everybody who's here, why ever you're here.
Cool. So we shall start off with a little bit of talking about who we are and what kind of brought us to writing, what started our transition from pantsing to plotting. Although maybe you want to know what pantsing and plotting are exactly. Um, if you don't actually participate in NaNoWriMo, these are terms that probably you kind of vaguely know of. Maybe you've heard of pantsing in terms of the prank that people pull. In this case, we're talking about flying by the seat of your pants or writing a story, just discovering what's going on in the story as you write it. Another term I've heard used for this is called discovery drafting, when you're figuring the story out as you go.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no,
We'll
no,
figure out
just
the rhythm eventually.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. So pantsing is absolutely the just you go in. I mean, you might have like a couple of ideas. I feel like when I was a pantser, it was that I would have some image in my head or some scene in my head or a character, usually nothing massively developed, but just like this notion, maybe a couple different things that I was going to put together and we'll see what happens. Whereas plotting is, of course, planning everything in advance. The level that you do it at changes. There's also the term planting now or plotsing. I've heard it said both ways, where you kind of sit in the middle and I mean, again, with all of these terms, everybody does it a little bit differently. But you might be somebody who has like character sheets made, and you don't know where the story is going, or you have like a rough concept of where the story is going, but not like a fleshed out concept for it. So did I get everything there? Those are the three big categories. Of course, that middle one being a new one, but like playing is anywhere from coming up with an outline to like the full on Bible where you've got everything developed in advance. But like there is a big world to plotting out there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And for me, I kind of consider world building and plotting to be kind of two separate activities. One actually leads to a story, and the other one leads to a setting. And both are very, very useful, of course.
Yeah, I love world building. I have some stuff where I completely built a world for one project, and then for whatever reason that project got tabled, and I picked up the world and did something completely different with it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I definitely consider them to be two different things as well.
Awesome. So we came up with some questions for ourselves that we would just kind of ask and discuss, but also you are welcome to chime in with questions in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on the Twitch chat. I have to keep my Discord full screen, so it's a little harder for me to keep an eye on the Discord chat if you're over on the Discord server. But Chloe, can you keep an eye on Discord maybe?
I did. Um. Oop, yes. Let me do a little finagling because yeah, it is a bit complicated doing both. Oh, I'm looking at
Haha.
the
uh,
wrong room. Hold on.
oh
I'm
no.
literally looking at 3 right now, not 7. There we go. Panel 7. Yes, Brian Liu. I mean this chat.
Yep. And if anybody says something in the chat, in Discord, the Panel 7 chat in Discord, and we miss it, feel free to call our attention to it because we are kind of juggling between windows.
I feel like we're all just like vaguely unfamiliar with the programs that we are using to pull this off today.
Yep. Thank you, author Brian Liu. I also figured out I could just put my cell phone on the chat and have my cell phone. So now I have 4 screens going on. That's always fun.
Yeah, life of a streamer. I always have 3 screens going at the same time. Anyways, back to topic. So what is
Mhm.
the first question on the list?
So the first question is, why did you want to transition from pantsing to plotting?
Um, so I've always wanted, I've been writing, I've done NaNoWriMo. I think we figured out the other day that I've been doing it since 2003. I was a writer even before that. And I was always a pantser that always wanted to be a plotter because it seemed like they were so much more organized. Um, and and it felt like it was going to be a good way to keep myself driven and on task and to get through writer's block because of course like everybody writer's block was a big issue for me and it seemed like a good way to well, if I already have the plot there, then I just have to write it. But I could never really pull it off. And then 1 year for Nano, this would have been Nano 2019. My writing partner said, you should just write something completely fresh for Nano. I was in the middle of a series that I was really struggling with. And I ended up deciding to do a Christmas romance that I wanted to release that Christmas season, but we are in November of 2019. And I realized at that point that I really had no choice but to plot it if I was ever going to get it out. And I made it happen. And that's how I became a plotter.
That's really an awesome journey. For me, I also started Nano back in 2004, so a year after you. Um, and for a long time, what I would do is essentially discovery drafting. I'd want to know what the story is, and that was why I was writing this story. I wanted to see where these characters were going and how they were going to engage with the world that I'd built, which I could build some really amazing worlds. And when I really started to transition to plotting was when I went to grad school. I decided that I wanted to take my writing more seriously. I've always wanted to be a traditionally published author. Um, and that want and the success, right? You've got to bridge the gap somehow. So was I was blessed with the opportunity to be able to actually get an MFA in writing for children. So it was like genre writing, and the age group that I wanted was respected at my program. But the professors that I had, one of them's Anna Stanisławski. She publishes a lot of middle grade fiction. Um, they did in all of our writing courses just like lots of exercises of like, okay, let's figure out what the story is and how to pace it. And I remember I had read Holes, the novel Holes by Louis Sachar, turned into a movie starring Shia LaBeouf, that one, when I was a kid. But when we read it as a class in my writing class, you could see how intricate the plot was and how everything had to be planned out. And I was like, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to figure out, how do I pace this story? How do I make it happen? And how do I make the plot reveals really purposeful, intentional? Okay, we did get a question in. Where do you find yourself drowning more, in pantsing or in plotting? Like, what gets you, like, pantsing mode or plotting mode? Where do you drown in your ideas?
I don't. That's not really if I'm understanding the question properly, I don't. I've got a really weird technique when I'm plotting where I kind of throw all of my ideas out there and arrange them how they need to be, but like I don't ever have like a plethora. Like I never feel like I'm overloaded in ideas. And the same with back when I used to pants. I'm a very linear person. Generally get, I just keep going in the direction I'm going in. And I'm not somebody to get drowned in ideas.
Hmm. I think for me, like, it's a different kind of drowning in each case. If I am pantsing a story, back when I did much more pantsing, I would get lost in the many different ways the story could go and the different characters that would pop up. And wait a second, I kind of want to follow this thread over this way, and I want to follow that thread over that way. And it wasn't really a cohesive story, right? Um, And so narrowing down the threads that I wanted to pursue was really what would have me drowning and pantsing. And in plotting, what would get me drowning is more like, do I have enough plan yet? No, no, no. I have to go back into my world building and I have to flesh out this city that they're going to go to for this scene. And I've got to make sure I know the building layout of that hotel that they're staying in. And just like, no, no, you don't need the minute details. You just need the need the rough plan.
And I think with the problem that you had with pantsing, is to an extent, not that I wanted to go multiple directions, but like one of the reasons that I wanted to get out of pantsing is because I do have this like backlog of stories that I feel like are gone through the ages of like 17 different laptops over the course of my life. But um one of the reasons that I wanted to get out of pantsing was that, yeah, I feel like we've absolutely all had the experience where you feel really good about the direction that you're going in. And then you get to a point where you're like, oh, I actually can't, I have nowhere to go from here. There's no way for me to connect this where I wanted it to go. And for me, there'd be times when I'd be like, 10, 20, 30,000 words in. And I am not somebody, like, if things go off the rails, I'm really bad about getting them back onto the rails. So that was a major issue with me where I absolutely had these manuscripts that like I desperately wanted to get back on track and I was never able to get them back on track. And thankfully most of those are in a genre that I don't write in. I switched genres a few years back. So it doesn't hurt me that I have these stories so much anymore because I was never going to be able to use them. But yeah, that was a really good like why you might want to get out of pantsing.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. That the story goes off the rails. You get super lost in it, and then you're just like, okay, I have no idea where I'm going from here. How am I going to get the characters back from this? Um, so that actually leads kind of good into our next question that we had for us. Um, that is, what are some of the road bumps and plotting methods that didn't really work for you?
So for me, Um, right off the bat, and it's funny because I will absolutely recommend these to people all day because I recognize the fact that we are all very different. But for me, any time you give me anything to fill out, it's going to be a disaster. Any like character worksheet, any beat sheet, anything like that, they all sound so good in my brain, especially the characters. I cannot build my characters in advance. I have to learn the characters as I am writing the actual manuscript. And all of those, what would happen when I tried to use them is I would come up with something that felt really good. And then when I tried to write it, I couldn't keep it on track. And I would get really, really frustrated and then feel like I wasted all of this time doing the worksheets and the beat sheets and all of that. So that and then like I feel like a lot of the different methods like snowflake and stuff like that just never, nope, not for me.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. I think for me, I had an initial similar reaction to beat sheets. Like when I am planning the initial stages of the stories, they don't work well. But you can see I've got a beat sheet up on the wall behind me. Actually, it doesn't have any story scenes in it because I use that for editing. When I'm trying to figure out the pace of my story and I have already written and discovered the story, then going back to the beat sheet and going, okay, why is this section so slow? Oh, this is the part of the story that should be going like this, and I don't really have a scene that does that transition really well. Those kind of things really help me. So like initial beat sheet, not so much. I try to go more with a loose outline. And I also found that whether it is the save the cat method for figuring out your character's conflicts, or on the Right Hive server they call it Glowtown. Glowtown stands for ghost, lie, truth, want, and need. If you know those five things for your character, you can kind of figure out how's their journey is going to be. What's the thing that's haunting them as their ghost? Um, the truth that they need to learn. the lie that they're telling themselves, um, and I'm gonna have to type this out, and then I'm gonna have to let go of my button for push to talk to do it.
Okay, while you're doing that, the funny thing with that, I was thinking about it as you were like before, and then you brought this up, and I was like, oh, this is 100% an issue for me. I can't, like, that sort of stuff I absolutely can't do. And, like, I will finish a story, and I know that I will have all of those elements in it, but I couldn't possibly tell you as I am writing it what those elements are, what their wants and needs, and like all of that stuff. Whenever I'm asked what the theme of my story is, like I don't know. I don't have a theme for it. They're all things that really I have like a basic concept. I write romance. So there are certain, obviously, some of those blanks get like automatically filled in with romance, but yeah, they're not, I don't think about those things. And if I try to incorporate them, I feel like I end up with a really bad archetype where that's literally all they are, or that's not all they are. And the entire time I do the rough draft, I feel like I am missing what that character needs to be. And then when I go back and edit, I'm like, oh, actually, this character is exactly how I like it. But the entire time, I'm like, oh, I'm not getting their wants. I'm not getting their wants. I'm not getting their
Mhm,
wants.
mhm.
So yeah, I can't, like, stuff like that doesn't work for me. But I'm glad it works for you though.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of the opposite. Going through this process helps me dig into the character deeper and figure out who they are as a unique person and not just as, oh, this person is the hero of the story that I am inserting in. Because it gets me thinking about their backstory and what's really affecting them. It gets me thinking about what kind of journey I want them to go on throughout the story, which helps me to figure out the plot a little bit better.
We're all different.
Hmm. Which also does go into the what did work for you question. So, yeah, Glowtown worked
Oh,
for me.
awesome. Ironically, what did initially work for me was a beat sheet. It didn't work, but it was what got me going in the right direction. I used it once, and then when I tried to use it again, I was like, "This, I can't actually do this. I don't understand half the terms on this thing." But I I knew that I had like 3 days to get this story completely narrowed down. I wrote um 70,000 words in 14 days. So like, again, I just didn't have time to actually do the pantsing as I went through. So I took a beat sheet and I did the best I could with it. But what I do is I come up with like those basic points. Okay. So my process is, if I am using, I'll use something like Scrivener, or I usually use Wavemaker now, but Scrivener is a good reference because most people know it. I will actually just fill in my Scrivener with a bunch of blank scenes, and I will start putting notes in on scenes as where I think the major plot points should go. Um, with that first time, it was following a beat sheet, and then everything got a little screwed up as I was writing it because there's no way for me to hit the beats at the time that I was supposed to. But that is how I do it. And just like every pass I make, I figure out a new connector to go between the scenes. And I basically write a paragraph for every scene, but I don't do it linearly. And that's what I consider to be my discovery phase. Like, I'm still having that discovery from pantsing. It's just that the discovery is, I don't have to make the words sound right as I'm doing the discovery. My discovery is, oh, I know how these two things are going to connect now. And that is the basics of how I do everything now. And then back when I was working, I'm a full-time author now, but back when I was working, I would just keep like a little notebook in my pocket, And every time I thought of something, I would write it in the notebook. The phone doesn't work. I don't know why I couldn't put a note on my phone. It had to be an actual notebook. But that's something else that, like, every day when I went home, I would just plug all of those notes into the spread where it needed to go. That's it.
Yeah, totally. I wanted to just highlight a couple of things that people have said in the chat. That there's no Kit Falba said there's no right pantsing or plotting. Stephen King is a famous and vocal pantser, for example. And like that's something I hope that you hear in this panel is like there are times when pantsing is good, there are times when plotting is good, and figuring out your journey as an author is really what is the most important thing for both of us. The transition from being fully pantsers to having plotting elements has helped our writing.
Mhm.
And that journey is something everybody has to go on. You got to try out different stuff. So for me, what worked, the first thing that really truly worked for me in terms of writing a plot was an exercise one of my creative writing instructors gave me, which was the and then exercise. You write down what's going to happen with the story. You start every single sentence with and then. And every single sentence, follows through with the consequences of the actions of the previous sentences. And so it gave me something really, really loose, but also a way to really connect the points of the story from one to the next, that the characters' actions have consequences. The things that happen in this part of the story impact the next part of the story, impact the next part of the story. And I would end up with like this 2-paragraph blob of this is what the novel is going to be. And I could take it from there and then start to make a better outline and figure out the scenes. Plus, that same exercise I started to use when I would get stuck in a scene, I would think about, okay, what's the and then? What's coming next? Um,
So then, do you plot linear then? Like, do you actually follow that and then when you're plotting now? Is that how you, I mean, obviously, I know
mhm.
that like we all have these ideas that are in the future that you have to kind of like put to the side for now. But as you are doing your actual plotting, do you do that process linearly?
It really. Hmm. Oh no, we crashed. Did I crash? Okay, Discord temporarily crashed. Discord temporarily crashed, but I think I'm getting
Ooh.
it back up.
Oh,
Do. Go back to there.
okay. Um,
Yeah, give me 1 second to
okay.
get this turned
Oh, here
back
we go.
on.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. Um,
Ooh.
that is it really depends on the story. Some stories I actually know like the consequences before I know the beginning, right? Like I know that I want to have the characters do this thing and fail at it, and I know that middle part of the story really, really well, and then I have to backtrack and figure out how do we get there. um but the real thing for me, now I lost my train of thought because of tech issues. That's always fun. Um, I think that for me,
Well, disaster.
what really really got me thinking about how to plan versus plot, and what I need to focus on plotting out most of all in my stories is I've gotten several full requests from agents, and I got the same personalized feedback from multiple agents on full requests. And that was, I love your voice, I love your world building, but I don't connect to the characters. And that's where, as I've dug in and investigated, how do I plot in a way that really gives my characters agency and makes them connectable and relatable? And I think that's why the stuff that's been working for me for plotting lately has been the character related story arc stuff, like Save the Cat and creating character arcs by K.M. Wieland. It sits next to my desk. It's a good one right there.
Makes sense. If that is where your Achilles heel is, so to speak, then it absolutely makes sense that that's where you want to focus your you're plotting on. If you know, like if you're a pantser, but you know that there's this one area that you are struggling with, that's absolutely where you should focus on trying to integrate plotting more.
Was just typing
What's
into the
next
chat
on
the
our list?
resource. The next question on our list is, when do you still pants?
I okay, so I'm gonna say I don't, but we'll put a caveat on that. Um, so I mentioned that when I switched from plotting to pantsing, it was when I was in the middle of a series that I was struggling with, and I decided to do something completely different, table that one for a little bit and do something completely different. When I did go back to that series, I said, well, I'm on the last book of this series and it's 70% written. And I wrote this series pantsing, so obviously I'm going to pants this. It took me another year to write that, and I wrote 4 other books. In the meantime, it took me a year, and at that year mark, I was like, screw it, I'm plotting. I have to plot the rest of this. Like once I switched from plotting or from pantsing to plotting, I couldn't go back. Now I do. So in addition to my romance novels, I do also write erotic short fiction. This is like, depending on your definition, either flash or short. They're under 5,000 words, and those I will not plot. I do know people who do, and I'm always kind of shocked that somebody would plot something that's under 5,000 words. I will say though that when I don't that because I don't plot them, a lot of times even in this, some of these are 1,000 words, and at the end of it, I was completely unprepared for where it was going to end up. So I guess I see the merit in everything. So I will say that that is the one time where I do not plot, is when I am writing very short fiction.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, the main time when I still pants is if I'm doing a noveling event like National Novel Writing Month, and I can tell the story that I have plotted isn't working for me, then I just sort of let it go off the rails and see what happens, and then I can kind of backtrack, revise the plot, figure out a new plot. So it's like if I am stuck, then I go, okay, what's some random thing I can throw in here and see what happens, and just let it happen and spin for a little bit until I start to feel the plot again.
Works. That's that is something that happens with plotting. Is sometimes the plot that you came up with just didn't work, or sometimes, well, I guess either way, it's just an example of it not working. Um, of course, thankfully, since we're talking to writers, we can say crazy things like I have no control over my characters. Um, so even with a plot and a rough idea of my characters, and even though I know like the story is always going to end exactly how I want it to end, um, sometimes those characters, they're the way that they develop just goes in a different way than some of the scenes that you might have plotted out once you get to them, especially for me in like the last quarter of it. um those What happens might not any longer be something that that character would do. And when that happens, I will rewrite the plot, or sometimes I will deliberately only plot 3/4 of the story so that I know better when I get to that point. Like, I'll still have notes for after that, but it'll be just very, this is where the plot is going notes. Um, so that when I do get to that point, if I do need to flex things some, I haven't wasted time on a plot that didn't ultimately work out.
Yeah, totally. The one thing that comes to mind for me, and we got a question coming into the chat, so I'll
Mhm.
just babble this real quick and then we'll take your question. Go ahead, type your question. We see it. Um, Melissa Caruso, she writes YA fantasy, very good series. Starts It's the Swords and Fire series, and then I can't remember what the name of the Rooks and Ruin, I think, is the new trilogy she's working on. But cool magic system, all of that stuff. And she talked about how when she's writing, she will often start off with a discovery draft, and then she'll get about halfway through the book, and then she'll hit this wall, and she'll go, okay, I'm at a wall and I know what I need to change for the first half of my book, and I will go back, and then she will go back and like actually make the outline, and now that she's got that part of the story figured out, she's able to figure out what the story actually is. Um so that's another time I think, that's what pantsing I think is really good for, when you want to get a sense of what the story is and what who the characters are before you commit anything to the plot.
A really an important thing to keep in mind if you are trying to make this transition from pantsing to plotting is don't feel like if you tell yourself that once you start writing you absolutely have to follow this plot, you're probably setting yourself up for disaster. um,
Mhm.
be aware that like no matter how much plotting you do, you're never going to be able to stick to it exact. I mean, I'm sure that there are some people who do, but probably you're not going to stick to it exactly. So don't feel so beholden to the plot that you wrote, and also don't beat yourself up if you can't follow the plot that you wrote.
Mhm. So the question in the chat is, when planters start, where do they decide to start? And I think that really depends on an individual person. Stories start from different places. For me, usually it starts from either an interesting setting premise or an interesting character. And that's kind of where I start going, ooh, I want to know more about this.
Yeah, I think with planters, I feel like mostly when you talk to people who are planters, it'll be that there is some specific element of the story that they really, I was gonna air quote plot, but they prepare it very well. I feel like some people who just do that world building identify themselves as being planters. Where you have this one item that you really do very specifically, and then you kind of let the rest of it play. Or the other style with planting is, I know people who basically, whether they're actually taking a beat sheet or just like making the beats, they'll kind of have like a very brief idea of what each beat is going to be, but they don't have a really detailed outline within those beats. They just know that like somehow they gotta get from A to B to C to D to E.
Yeah, definitely. Garth Nix has changed his website, so I can't find the thing anymore. Um, but Garth Nix, fantasy author from Australia, Old Kingdom series, amazing. Do read, do recommend 110%. It ages really, really well. I did a reread and I was like, this is still applicable to the world today. But that's digression. On his website back in the day, he had this really cool handwritten outline of the first book of the Old Kingdom series, Sabriel. And then he talked about how pretty much the only thing that stayed the same from that handwritten outline and what actually ended up in the book was like the opening scene with the rabbit. And if you've read Sabriel, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't read Sabriel, go read Sabriel. Um, so like outlines are not something you write and then you are stuck with. Outlines are a tool to help you make progress, and when they stop helping you make progress, that's when you've got to let go of them.
Yes, and that is exactly what I meant by don't be beholden to the plot, Officer Genius. If that's what you're asking. That's exactly it. Like don't beat yourself up if your story doesn't end up in the right direction. And I don't know if this is what happened with that author, but also remember that everybody is different in their editing stage. So that author might have followed his outline perfectly, and then once it was written was like, well, but I do actually want to change all of this stuff, and then like eventually it just morphed into something completely different, but that outline got them through the rough draft.
Hmm.
There are a few different ways you can go with that, but yeah. So it's it's all of these things, regardless of what tools you use, are meant to make the actual drafting stage of it go more smoothly. Um, Ideally, it also gives you a better manuscript when you get to the end and you are at the editing phase, but everybody is different with editing as well. Plenty of authors go into it just like writing a whole bunch of scenes and then figuring out later how it's going to actually piece together. So, again, like just don't stick too hard or don't feel like you have to stick too hard to your outline and don't feel like you failed just because what you plotted isn't what is in the final product.
Hmm. Something else that I really love is if you've got an outline, you've got a plot, you know what's going to happen, but you're stuck in a certain part of the story, you have your outline. Jump to the part of the story that actually interests you right now.
Yeah,
If what
that's
is holding you right now is you know that in 3 chapters, these two characters are going to have a massive fight and they are going to just, their friendship's going to fall apart, then jump to that part, write that out, see how it feels, and maybe you'll be able to go back and backtrack and fill in the stuff in between. But it's totally okay to take a break from the part of the story that's not working for you. And if you've got a plan, I think that it's a lot easier to go, okay, this part of the story, not working. Let's try this part of the story. And then I can bridge the gap later.
that is another reason why I felt it so critical to switch to transition from pantsing to plotting is because I am even now as a plotter, I am 100% a linear writer. But as a pantser, if I did have to do that where I skipped ahead, once I went back and tried to fill in, I was screwed. Like I was never able to connect what I thought would connect. I always
Mm.
thought I was going in the right direction, skipping ahead to that fight scene or whatever it might be. And I always thought I'd be capable. Like we're talking about, 2 or 3 scenes. Of course I can make things work together in 2 or 3 scenes. Was never able to do it. Now, I am able to do that occasionally, jump a scene if I'm like really stuck on an element in that scene. And I have found that not only am I able to go back and fill in that scene, but also with that outline that I've written, I can generally do it after I've only written like 2 or 3 more scenes. It's not even something that I have to save to the very end anymore. It just feels a lot easier for me to say, I can't do this scene, so let me jump to the next one. Okay, now that I've written the next one, now I can go back and get this one and it flows now.
Kind of the same way. Another thing that I'll do is like give myself permission to write the scene badly. Like this scene is going to need way more
Yes.
description. This scene is going to need more character emotion, but I'm just going to write it like I'm in the 3rd grade again and I'm my 3rd grade writer self and just kind of like go, and then there were some cool action moments and then they
Yep.
fought and they punched and then blah 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 blah. So it's like the scene exists, but I know it's not really the scene.
I use the highlighting tool. I highlight, I write that like just like it's basically a more detailed outline of the outline I already have, but it's
Mhm.
outlining um, paragraph by paragraph instead of scene by scene. And yeah, it works really well for me. Or sometimes it'll even be like a sentence. I'm not a heavy editor. What I write in my rough draft is pretty much ready to publish. Like obviously there's typos and a couple sentences need to be reworded. I usually have to rewrite the first scene, but I there's very little like hard editing I have to do. So, when I do have those moments when I'm drafting, it'll be just a single paragraph that I'm like, I can't come up with a way to phrase this. Like the phrasing isn't working. So highlight this just so I know when I go back that I have to make this sound better.
Yeah, I call those my chinchillas because I type in all caps the word chinchilla next to them so I can do a really quick, easy find in the document and find all of my chinchillas and
Brilliant.
clean them up.
Absolutely brilliant.
It's gonna mess me up if any of my characters ever have a pet chinchilla, though.
Now you know you can't have a pet chinchilla. They can have guinea pigs. Guinea pigs are also adorable.
Hmm.
Oh, you've got someone peeking out in the background. Is that a cat or is that a little dog?
That
It's a
is a
little
dog.
dog.
That's
Like,
Lily.
looking
She's
towards his
been,
head, I was like, oh, that's a
yep.
dog.
Lily has been underneath the blanket the entire time, which is why it looks like a mess. But yeah. Fox is somewhere. He's my other dog. He's on the floor next to my feet. Sometimes Fox is up there, sometimes Lily's up there, and now she hears me talking about her, so she's gonna say, oh, no, she's gonna burrow down. She's sleepy.
Do we have more on our list?
I don't have anything else on the list, so open questions.
So, Hagstrom commented on your third grader idea. As a pantser, they said, as a pantser, I do tend to prepare my scenes that way. So, that's something else that, like, a good way to warm yourself up into being a plotter is literally just before you write a scene, pre-write your scene. It's a good practice even as a pantser, to before you start writing a scene, actually kind of develop the concept of where the scene is going, it just to give yourself a direction. And there's kind of that like active, just think about what you're doing. So that's something that I have done when I especially, like I mentioned before, that sometimes I'll only develop like three-quarters of the plot. And then when I get to the end, sometimes I feel like I don't need to do that last 25%. I can pants it to an extent. But I will always do that with every scene now. Just directly before I write the scene, I write a paragraph of what is going to happen in that scene, and then I write it out. So that's just another little thing you can do to prep yourself.
Yeah, sure. To answer Hagstrom's other question, the definition of plantser. A plantser is someone who lives kind of in between planning and pantsing. They maybe have a really, really loose outline, and maybe they have some world building elements or character sheets that they've done. But for the most part, they don't really commit to a plot, and at the same time, they have more than just a straight pantser who goes in with nothing.
I think
Moonflower.
it's just kind of being like a pantser plus. Like you're still
Mhm.
a pantser, but you've done a bit of extra work to begin with to give yourself a better direction of where you're going.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like anything, once you start to think about it, really every writer is on a spectrum between making a plan and just flying by the seat of their pants. Everybody's got that point where they are, and sometimes that point varies depending on the story too.
Yeah.
Mhm. In the chat, Moonflower Writer asks, "How do you plot when you don't know the end of the story?"
That is where I do my 75%. I There's absolutely nothing wrong. I feel like anybody will agree that if you've got I feel like it's very normal that if you kind of have a good idea of everything except the very end of the story, you can go ahead and set everything up for the first half or first three-quarters and then address that later. I've certainly, like, usually I had said before, the reason that I only go 75% is that sometimes my characters will take me on a different direction. But also sometimes I've written the plot up to that far and I'm just not entirely sure where I want to go from that point. And I feel like if I write this, I will get myself in the direction I'm going in. And that I've never had a story fail when I wasn't sure how it was going to end when I started it, but I still had a plot set up to get me most of the way through. It's just usually you get to the end of what you've plotted out, and then there's a bit of that bummer feeling of, oh no, I do now have to figure this out. But I can usually figure out in a couple of days.
Hmm. For me, what can kind of help is as I'm starting the story, I ask myself, what is the implicit promise of this story? The implicit promise is kind of like, what kind of story do I want to tell here? Do I want to tell an adventure fantasy story where the characters are going to go on a wild romp through a magical world? Do I want to tell a story that the implicit promise is you are going to discover the meaning of friendship as these characters struggle with their relationships with each other? And sometimes I don't know the ending, but knowing that's kind of the direction that I'm going in helps me to figure out, okay, this is what I want the story to be. These are the events that I want to have happen, and I can figure out the end as I'm going.
So Moonflower added on with I tend to write stories that just don't end, and I don't know how to tell when a story should end. A plant's are leaning toward pantsing. So this is where I was going before with like if there is a very particular problem that you have when you write, to look for the tools that will help you with that particular problem. So I don't know, Moonflower, if you have tried something like Save the Cat or Beat Sheets, but and of course like your current project this doesn't help you any, but it might be very beneficial to you to use even just like a basic beat sheet, or before you do anything else, decide exactly where your story is ending and then build everything in front of that to help you stay on that path. You might just need to define what the end is before everything else in order to get yourself to your end.
Hmm. You also asked about what if your stories have multiple arcs or multiple arcs that happen at one time. Um, so what comes to mind for me is as I've been trying to figure out how to do my character arcs, how to make my characters more relatable, I've been paying a lot of attention to the differences between different books that I enjoy reading. Um, Standalone books versus series books where each book has a self-contained plot with a beginning, middle, and end, versus epics where the storyline just kind of continues across all of the books. Um, and I think that the first thing you have to really do is decide what it is that you are writing. Are you writing a standalone? Are you writing a series where you want each book to have a distinct individual arc? Or are you writing an epic where it's okay that it's going to be 500,000 words of story before you get to the end? It's just going to meander and you're going to follow these characters and these characters' children, you know, all J.R.R. Martin style or whatever. Sorry, initials mixed up there.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know what I mean.
German.
Yeah.
Uh, two different authors. Yeah, no, I agree. So Moonflower later clarified that they're writing fan fiction. And that is kind of its own weird
Mm-hmm.
beast because they tend, depending on what you're doing, a lot of them don't end and they're more episodic than an actual, I don't want to say plot driven, but like something that's episodic is just told in a different way. And just like a television show might be set up so that it really doesn't end. And you have to just kind of do, I feel like when you are in that situation, that your models very much are television shows and looking at how they end what they do. The good news, if you're writing episodic, if that's where you're naturally like that is the rhythm that you get into, is that Amazon is about to drop their episodic program Vela in July. So there's actually a place to. There's already a couple places to publish, but Amazon is now getting in on that. So if that is your writing style, it's not the worst place to be right now.
Mm-hmm. Kind of building on that, if you think about the arc of the story, like um, I think that endings come in a few different ways. You've got an ending where the character stays the same. It's a neutral ending that whatever journey they went on didn't really change them, didn't really affect them, but they did go on some kind of something. You've got
Mhm.
a negative ending where the character is worse off than they were, and you got a positive ending where the character is better off than what they were. And sometimes you think, well, that's not an ending because the character's stuck in a hole in the middle of the forest, but that can be the end of a story too.
Mhm.
It just matters, just like, have you fulfilled the promise that you've made for this? And that goes, I think, for fanfic too.
I always I always think of Buffy when we're talking about endings of stuff like this, because if you're not familiar with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it ended twice. They weren't sure if they were going to get picked up for their last two seasons, so they made an end at the end of season 5, which was very much the character is in an extremely bad place, the worst possible ending, not like the worst written, but the most negative ending that was possible. And then when they did get two more seasons, they ended up ending on that neutral, where they're literally the characters who have survived the final fight, literally ride a school bus off into the sunset. So, yes, like either of those, both of those endings worked. So you do have those choices with it. And again, if you are writing something episodic that's fan fiction, you can play around with it for a while before you finally commit to an ending. You have those episodes, and then you say, well, this is I've committed to this ending, and now I am going to start writing to. But in the meantime, you can just like run around in circles, and everybody loves it in the fanfic community.
Yeah. A Moonflower writer said it's also so much harder when you aren't writing to publish. And I think
Mhm.
that's both true because it's like, yeah, you don't have to stick to all of the confines of the publishing world. You don't have to worry about monetization, you don't have to worry about what your audience is or isn't going to like, and that gives you so much more freedom and so many less guidelines.
Yes. And the discipline. You don't have the discipline. I don't make any money if I don't finish my books. So, yeah, it really does. Like it goes both ways. It's nice that you are not worried so much about keeping your fans and you're really doing it because it's something that you enjoy and you don't have to worry about like marketing and like just meeting fan expectations and all of that. But it also like not having that stuff can also be a problem.
Mhm. Yeah. I think that it just has to be something where you have to decide, am I personally frustrated that I don't have an ending in mind for this? And how am I going to find my ending? And if you find, I'm actually pretty satisfied with what I'm doing and just going on with the journey, it doesn't matter quite as much if you know where the end is. Let the writing meander, let it be fun. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, as long as people keep reading you, go for it. Yeah, like trying to find an end in something like that, it really is just like kind of nailing down what type of ending you want and then developing it from there. Like I said, I write romance, so I'm only allowed to write one type of ending.
mhm.
And obviously I've got a lot of flexibility with what I do with that one type of ending, but I have to have it happily ever after or happily for now or it's not romance. Um, but like in most other categories, you can, and if you're writing, like a mystery or suspense, obviously, like the crime needs to be solved at the end. The disaster needs to be prevented. But outside of those particular genre standards, it is just figuring out what do you want, the happy, the sad, or the neutral ending, and then decide what way you want to get there.
Yeah, definitely. We've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to start getting all of the stuff I need ready for us to be going rating. So if you've got some other questions you want to throw out at us, you can definitely do that. Um, we're here.
Yes, please send us some questions because I'm sure there are things that I wanted to say but I missed, but also I have that like I see a camera and my brain stops thing. So I don't know. There's some real
Hmm.
good things I had to say. They're not coming to me right now.
Some favorite problem solving techniques.
Oh, um, Do you mean like when you are stuck on developing your plot and what you need to do to get unstuck? Is that what you mean by that question? Um, in which case, I like to I like to switch from using a computer to okay. So my favorite getting unstuck method for me, and of course I'm trying to find an example of this, and I am not seeing it floating around me, but if I am really stuck on how to connect certain things, I switched to post-it notes and I write like a blurb, obviously not the entire um detailed plot, but like the various scenes that I want to have. I will write on a post-it note and I will lay them out on the floor or on a poster board or what have you. And I feel like it tends to be something where, like, once I have the literal big picture of everything that's going on right there in front of me, then I can kind of figure out. I get a better idea of how to fix the problems that I'm at.
Mhm. Kind of the same way. One of my things that I do when I'm feeling stuck is I actually do a self check. I go, okay, I'm stuck. Have I eaten today? Have I drank some water? Is there something going on in my life that is making me frustrated that I need to deal with? And if all of that is check and it's good, then it's definitely the story that has me stuck. So I'll go in and I'll start to go, okay, where did this start being a problem in the story? I'll compare my outline to what I've been writing and just see like what what broke down where. But I think that for me, one of the best techniques for problem solving is just having a friend that I can sit down and say, this is where I'm at. I just need to talk to somebody about this. And it doesn't matter that you don't know anything about the story. I just thank you for being my willing friend to listen to me while I work through this out loud. And just being able to talk through it out loud instead of trying to just push through and write the scenes can be really helpful for me.
Yeah, I was a cake decorator, and the great thing with that is that first of all, I'm working mostly with women, so I'm like, let me tell you about this crazy romance I'm working on, and also like we can talk the entire time because you can talk and decorate cake at the same time.
Hmm.
And so yeah, those coworkers were invaluable to me. My friends, I have the friends. I have one friend who I will just throw anything at and she'll pick it up. Also, another thing that I like to do is I will literally bake a cake in my house. And as I am doing that, it's a very mindless process to bake it and then decorate it. And it gives me something else to do while I'm thinking and just like being, yes, being productive in some other way instead of staring at that computer screen can make a big difference because you're not getting as frustrated with yourself. You're accomplishing something while you're not necessarily accomplishing your writing thing, you are accomplishing something.
Yep, totally. And we are in our last like
You're
second
muted.
here.
Your talk
Yep.
button.
We are in our last couple of seconds now, so we're just gonna go ahead, wrap up. I've gone over to our thank you for joining screen. It's been amazing having you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
So awesome. Thank you for joining us. Next, we're going to be raiding into our chill and chat stream. You can find other panels. I've got them on the screen right now. Or go to the calendar link in the chat. And yeah, definitely reading just to loosen up can be helpful too, or finding things that do the thing well that you're trying to do in your story. If there's a TV show that does that thing really well, watch it again and see how they did it, and then see what you can do to kind of do the same thing. All right, getting the raid ready.